leadership that the government was trying to fight, but about the very people in that region, which happened to be mostly ethnic Tigrayans. And I happen to be ethnic Tigrayan. TPLF stands for Tigrayan People Liberation Front. They were originally started about 50 years ago for that cause, but they have strayed from that initial cause for a very long time. Tigray in many ways is really poor. There's not been a whole lot of development in that region. And especially after that group went into power in 1991, essentially the war sort of started when they went ahead and had that election. I mean, if you think about whether any state in the United States can decide to just go ahead with their own type of election outside of the system that's created, it's essentially starting a war. And then they actually started the physical war in early November. They justify it by saying there were troops that were moving around on the north part, Eritrean troops, and in the south. But nonetheless, you had an election that was considered illegal, and you actually went ahead and pulled the trigger. So to your point, a lot of the US-based or Western-based media does not highlight that at all. And in some cases, particularly the New York Times, there was a recent report with Declan Walsh and Mark Simons. They essentially say the government started it. So those sort of things, and I've been in the business for 10 years, mostly for corporate media. I got to tell you, I will never again take at face value any report from the New York Times, AP, CNN, even Reuters or the BBC about any foreign country. I can't do it. There's just been so many bold-faced lies and omissions in the reporting that you can't even call it journalism at all. It's purely propaganda.
The U.S. backed a violent coup attempt in Nicaragua in 2018, as we've often talked about and reported on. And in that time as well, what happened? There was a massive coordinated social media purge of Sandinistas. In fact, some of the friends I know who had their accounts purged last week, who I've talked to in person, I know, again, these are real people, I know them. This is the second or third or even fourth time that they've been purged. Warlords, and then they were just all like doing drugs and getting drunk and brutalizing civilians in the communities. And then they were literally hunting down Sandinista activists and supporters. They had WhatsApp groups and other social media groups spreading around photos of Sandinista activists. I have friends, I know people who had their photos sent around, their addresses doxed, their phone numbers doxed, and they were threatened to be killed. There were Sandinistas who were killed, who were tortured. There were houses burnt down, houses marked. This is like biblical stuff where the fascists would go mark the houses of Sandinistas. And while this was happening, the big social media corporations, which are basically arms of the U.S. government, they did a systematic purge of Sandinistas so they could not expose what was actually happening. So the only information or disinformation, rather, that people would have access to about Nicaragua would be the right-wing opposition backed by the U.S. or the major corporate media outlets. And here you can see, this is reporting that Max did on the ground during the coup attempt. The purge was then, in 2018, was an attempt to control the narrative to prevent Nicaraguans from being able to share their own experiences and dispel the lies in the media. And that's exactly what's happening right now.
This is the home of a council member in Messiah. It was completely burned down and trashed by U.S.-backed opposition gangs in 2018. So as Ben's explaining, the purge is an extension of this campaign.
Well, and now the latest purge is before the November 7th election. So now most of the major Sandinista journalists, influencers, communicators, media outlets, and activists have all been erased from the internet. So they're not going to be able to challenge the corporate media narrative, which is just fed by the U.S. government. And they're going to say that the election was supposedly illegitimate, that supposedly it's a dictatorship, that supposedly Nicaraguans don't support the government. All complete lies.
It all comes down to global efforts. I think this will be a phased process. For instance, if some countries reach a certain rate of full vaccination, we will probably be able to travel there. But if some countries' vaccination rate remains low, I think we'd take it step by step. Basically, I think we will be able to travel abroad by the end of the next year.
Sudan's Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has ordered the release of 4 detained civilian ministers, and the time of their release is still unclear. Burhan's decision comes after a phone call with UN Chief Antonio Guterres urging a democratic transition. A Reuters reports a source close to Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok says there is progress in talks between the deposed leader and the army. Meanwhile, after military removed barricades, tribal protesters lifted a weeks-long blockade on seaport and on pipelines.
And we are back with our world lead in a CNN exclusive. You heard President Biden's promise during his CNN town hall. The United States, he said, will defend Taiwan if it is attacked by China. The White House later walked back those remarks. But now Taiwan's president tells CNN she is confident the U.S. would step up if Beijing tried to make a move on the democratic island. Those comments coming from the president's first international TV interview in nearly 2 years, where she also tells our Will Ripley the threat from China is increasing every single day.
At this temple in Taipei, prayer and politics go hand in hand for Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen.
Normally, when I go to the temple, there are hundreds of people there. I will shake hands with each one of them.
People are remarkably happy, at ease.
You have to give them a sense that there's somebody there to take care of them.
Elected in 2016, Tsai won re-election by a landslide last year on a promise to keep people safe from what she calls a growing threat across the Taiwan Strait. Is Taiwan more safe today than it was when you became president in 2016?
If it's a threat from China, it's increasing every day.
The mainland's massive military, 2 million strong, more powerful than ever. China flew 150 warplanes near Taiwan in just 5 days this month. This democracy of more than 23 million, governed separately from the mainland for more than 70 years since the end of China's civil war, still seen as a breakaway province in the eyes of Beijing's communist rulers, who have never controlled the island.
This is Sleido, also known as Molly Wickham, a land defender and matriarch of the Girimden clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation.
There's now a clan cabin on the drill pad site where CGL plans to drill under Wudzinkwah. In 2010, there were 13 proposed pipeline projects to go through Wet'suwet'en territory. Investors were forced to pull out of these mega destructive projects through our territory, and Coastal GasLink pipeline is the only one left. From Enbridge, Pacific Trails Pipeline, Spectra, Pembina, and several others.
To see our interview with Sleido, please go to democracynow.org. And in labor news, striking Alabama coal miners returned to New York City this week to bring their protest to the offices of hedge fund BlackRock, the largest shareholder of Warrior Met Coal. 6 rally-goers were arrested during a peaceful sit-in protest. 1,000 members of the United Mine Workers of America have been on strike for over 7 months. The Justice Department is suing Texas over its recently passed voter suppression law, saying it violates federal voting rights laws by targeting Texans of color, voters who don't speak English, and voters with disabilities.
Well, we begin this news hour with breaking news out of Iraq, where protests are taking place against October's parliamentary election results. Now, there are clashes, as you can see from these live pictures, between protesters and security forces. We understand that stones have been thrown and tear gas has been deployed. This, of course, follows those parliamentary elections in October. Mahmoud Abdul Wahid, he joins us now live from Baghdad. Why are these protests happening?
Well, Hala, apparently violence escalated after the protesters started throwing security forces with stones, and then security forces near the green zone area also tried to fire in the air to disperse the protesters.
Capitalism has failed. Coronavirus, strong men, rising fascism, climate crisis, planet becoming extinct. We are in the last act of capitalism. It's like a global mafiosa that is running the world now. It is not only political institutions that are disintegrating, but also the societies. The extreme polarization dehumanized many people all around the world. And these strong guys are talking to each other behind closed doors, making decisions for the destiny of our kind. Capitalism did not only ruin equality, justice, but also it damaged basic moral values of humankind. It started with the motto of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, "There is no alternative." It was a command for the globe not to think anymore. Without even knowing, many of us submitted to that motto to make us think that we cannot do any better than this. This is the natural state of humankind. Capitalism is not the natural state of humankind, and it is not the best we can do. The insanity we are going through are not the consequences of the collapse of the system. The insanity is inherent in this system. We are not collapsing as a humankind. It is only a system that is collapsing. And it's not very old. It's a new system, and we can do better than this, and we can find a new system. There are many times in today's world there is no hope. So what do you do when there is no hope? If you have faith, even when there is no hope, you can still act.
I will never again take at face value any report from the New York Times, AP, CNN, even Reuters or the BBC about any foreign country. I can't do it. There's just been so many bold-faced lies and omissions in the reporting that you can't even call it journalism at all. It's purely propaganda.